What would it take for a woman to leave everything behind, her throne, her kingdom, her people, and set out on a journey across scorching deserts, over vast lands, carrying treasures that could buy anything the world has to offer? The Queen of Sheba did just that. But there's one thing we must understand about her story. We don't even know her real name. The Bible offers us no grand backstory, no introduction fit for royalty. All we get is a whisper, the Queen of Sheba. And yet, that simple title hides a world of mystery that we can't ignore. She was not like any other ruler. When she arrived in Jerusalem, a long caravan of camels laden with gold, spices, and unimaginable riches followed her. The air around her was thick with an unspoken awe. The city fell silent. No one had ever seen a woman travel so far, not to conquer, not to marry, but to seek. Seek what? Wisdom, truth, something that could not be found in wealth, power, or even the most splendid of kingdoms. And she came not just to meet a man, but to face a king, Solomon, the wisest of all, renowned for a wisdom that reached beyond human understanding. But why? Why did she travel so far? Was it mere curiosity? Or was it a hunger so deep, so unyielding, that no throne, no riches, no power could ever satisfy? What drove her to cross every boundary and risk everything just for a taste of wisdom? The Bible doesn't give us all the answers. It leaves us with a question, an invitation to follow the path of this extraordinary queen. But there's one thing that stands out, a detail, small yet monumental. Centuries later, Jesus himself spoke of her, calling her the Queen of the South. But why? What was it about her that he remembered? He said that she would rise in judgment, not because of her wealth or her kingdom, but because of her pursuit of the wisdom of God. Have you ever felt the emptiness of having everything but still yearning for more? Have you ever felt lost in the noise, wondering if anyone sees the depth of your soul? If so, this story is for you. Because the Queen of Sheba wasn't just a ruler, she was a seeker, just like you and me. If you're ready to uncover the power behind her journey, comment 777 and join me as we step into the mystery of the Queen who conquered more than just a king. Are you ready to discover what it means to search for wisdom beyond wealth, to feel the thrill of divine pursuit? Let's walk this path together. The Queen of Sheba. Story: the woman who conquered King Solomon. They named it Sheba, a blazing kingdom in the southern lands where the sun did not merely scorch the sand, but seemed to press itself into the very souls of those who walked beneath it. A place where gold was pure, incense burned sweet, and trade ships cut through the Red Sea like knives. But within this empire of splendor and wealth, there lived a woman who remained untouched by the comforts that ruled most hearts. From the time she could walk, there was something unusual in her silence. While other girls were being trained in the art of pleasing men with soft glances and careful words, she was already training her spirit to ask the questions no one dared to ask. She would sit quietly near the columns of her father's chambers, eavesdropping on conversations meant for elder ears, disputes between philosophers, priests, and foreign scholars who came bearing riddles. When the village elders boasted of the caravan routes stretching like veins across the desert, she asked with a steady voice, "Why do we give treasures to idols that have no breath, no ears, no answers?" Her question wasn't scolded. It was feared. There was something about the way she looked when she spoke, a gaze that seemed to see beyond what was visible. Her father died before his time, and while many expected the kingdom to fracture, the throne was placed in the hands of a girl barely old enough to be called woman. A young queen in a court of bearded men, eyes watching her like hawks, circling the edge of power. They whispered of her downfall before her first decree, but instead, something unexplainable happened. She did not fall, she rose. Under her reign, Sheba flourished. Its coffers overflowed, its merchant fleets grew stronger, and its borders remained untouched by war. Foreign leaders sent emissaries not to intimidate, but to admire. They said her ships reached coasts no Sheban vessel had ever dared to reach. Yet within the magnificence of her palace, beyond the praise and the polished stone walls, she remained restless. There was one thing, one haunting presence she could never command, the quiet ache within her own spirit. When the moon hung full above her rooftop, when the laughter of banquets died down and her chambers returned to silence, she would lie awake, not with thoughts of betrayal or rebellion, but with the hollow stillness of a soul that had not yet found home. What is power without purpose? What is a throne if it cannot answer the cries of the heart? All the gold, the silks, the spices, none of it silenced the voice that echoed inside her chest, a voice that whispered, "Who are you beyond this crown? And if all this crumbles, what part of you remains eternal?" Have you ever had everything others dream of, yet still feel as if you're missing something essential, something sacred? No one saw this side of her. At banquets she was a vision, commanding, clever, charismatic. But beneath the regal veil, she felt like a woman misplaced in her own palace, a soul that belonged not to wealth but to wonder. Then, during what should have been an ordinary audience with a Jewish merchant, everything shifted. He spoke not of trade, but of a man, a king, not known for his armies or his riches, but for something rarer. Wisdom, not just any wisdom, but divine wisdom. Solomon, they called him, a ruler whose insight was said to come from the mouth of God himself, a man who could read the hearts of others, who offered answers where others gave riddles, and who did not hoard his knowledge behind palace gates. He was not merely a king. He was a mirror to the soul. Could such a man truly exist? Could someone so far away see what even her own priests could not? That night, the queen stood alone atop the highest terrace of her palace. The scent of frankincense still lingered in her robes. Her gaze fell upon the distant stars, and for the first time in many years, she let herself hope. The wind rolled in from the sea, as if inviting her to follow, and in a voice that broke through the silence like a trumpet, she said, "Prepare the camels. I will go." No one in the court dared to question her directly. Why would a sovereign abandon her empire for a king she had never met? Whispers filled the court. Some believed she was after an alliance. Others gossiped about power plays or even seduction, but none of them knew the truth. Not even she could have fully explained it. All she knew was this: staying meant spiritual suffocation, leaving meant breath. If there was even a chance that Solomon could answer the questions she dared not say aloud, then she had no choice but to chase the unknown. Sheba was rich in treasure, but her spirit had become poor in peace. What good is a kingdom if the queen's heart is crumbling in silence? And if there existed a place where a soul could be seen, heard, understood, then she would journey through burning sands and stinging winds to find it. The road was not kind to her. The journey stretched not just across land, but across time, carving into her spirit like the desert wind carved patterns in the dunes. Months passed, and still the camels marched on. The caravan that followed her was not just burdened with treasures, chests of gold, precious jewels, and fragrant spices. It also carried the weight of her silence, her unspoken weariness, and the invisible ache of a soul in search of something far beyond material wealth. Each step into the unknown came with restless nights and questions that had aged with her. Under the scorching heat of the noonday sun, the earth shimmered as though it too trembled with uncertainty. At night, when the desert grew quiet and the stars blinked down like ancient watchers, she would retreat into her tent, alone. There, beneath the silk ceiling stirred by the whispering wind, she would open a small, worn leather journal. The pages were faded, creased by time, and by the hands of a girl who once dared to think beyond the borders of her crown. These weren't the writings of a queen. These were the private prayers and ponderings of a soul that refused to stop seeking. In her own hand she had written, "Do the gods really hear us, or are we merely whispering into silence? Why do the innocent bleed while the cruel sit on thrones? How can one tell the voice of truth from the cunning sound of deception? And if there truly is a God above all gods, one who sees the heart, does he see mine?" The priests of her land had always evaded these questions with polished answers, distracting her with rituals and riddles, but none of it ever reached the depth of what she longed to know. Do you remember the first time you questioned something sacred and no one dared to look you in the eye? She found no peace in gold nor guidance in incense, only the firelight's slow dance across the walls of her tent, the distant howl of the wind, and the deafening quiet of uncertainty. There was no voice from heaven, no sign in the sky, just the persistent ache of a woman who refused to settle for half-truths and empty traditions. One evening, as the flames crackled and her mind once again drifted into deep waters, her most trusted advisor sat beside her, eyes shaded with concern. His voice was low, gentle. "Your Majesty, why must we travel so far to hear one man speak? Have we not wisdom enough among us already?" She didn't turn her gaze from the fire. She didn't raise her voice. She simply replied, "I'm not searching for more words. I'm searching for truth." And with that, the conversation ended. No one questioned her again. As the weeks wore on, her caravan climbed the rolling ridges of foreign hills, drawing closer to something she couldn't yet name. Then, one morning, just before dawn, the lead rider raised his arm and pulled his horse to a stop. Dust settled at his feet. His voice rang out with awe. "Jerusalem, the city is before us." She emerged from her tent slowly, the wind catching the edge of her veil as if to lift her forward. She did not speak. She simply stared, not at a city made of stone, but at a promise whispered in the shadows of her heart. Something in her shifted in that moment. It was not joy, not relief, but something deeper, a trembling recognition. Could it be that what she had searched for her entire life was now just beyond the horizon? What is it like to stand on the edge of an answer that has pursued you through every season of your soul? She didn't know what lay ahead. She didn't know if Solomon would receive her or if the questions she carried would find their voice. But what she did know, what had never felt clearer, was that something sacred awaited her in Jerusalem, and this time she would not turn away. Jerusalem did not merely open its gates to her, it erupted in celebration. Drums thundered through the narrow streets, banners fluttered like flames in the wind, and a sea of faces gathered to catch even a glimpse of the mysterious queen, whose fame had traveled farther than her ships. Children sat atop rooftops, elders leaned from shaded archways, and merchants paused their trade, all captivated by the caravan glittering with gold and rare fragrances. But the Queen of Sheba, adorned in royal silks and jewels more dazzling than the sun itself, barely seemed to notice. Her eyes did not scan the crowds. Her heart did not leap at the city's majesty, because she knew none of this was what she came for. Her purpose was not spectacle, it was not acclaim, it was him. Behind those guarded palace doors was the man the world could not explain, a king unlike any other. And she hadn't crossed deserts for a throne, she had crossed them for a voice. Not just any voice, but the one she believed might finally echo back to her soul with something she'd never been given: understanding. When she entered Solomon's court, she did not bow. She had ruled men who had tried to humble her with silence. She had stared down generals and priests alike. She had weathered storms, both political and spiritual, that would have drowned lesser rulers. She stood tall, every step a testimony to the weight she had carried across kingdoms. Yet her silence in that moment was louder than any decree. Her gaze, sharp yet searching, met Solomon's. He did not respond with pomp or the cold authority of a man who had everything. He did not sit high and wait to be worshipped. Instead, Solomon rose. He descended from his throne, not to assert power, but to honor presence. He greeted her not as a rival sovereign, not even as a guest, but as if he had always known her, as if her journey had been foretold. There are no scrolls detailing the length of their conversation, no record of exact words or hours past. But Scripture gives us a clue in 1 Kings 10:1-3. It says she came to test him with hard questions. And Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king. On the surface, it may sound like an intellectual contest, but what if those were not riddles of wit, but burdens of the soul? She did not come to ask what trade routes to pursue or what tactics won wars. She came with the kind of questions that grow in silence, sharpened by years of private pain. How do you stay pure when surrounded by power? How does justice survive in a world where the weak are crushed? Is loneliness the secret tax of leadership? And how can one ever discern if the voice that speaks within is divine or merely fear? And Solomon, the man said to be the wisest of all, did not respond like a scholar performing before a crowd. He did not cite laws or poems. He listened deeply, not to answer but to understand. And when he did speak, he spoke in stories, not grand parables to impress, but memories, raw, unguarded, almost painful. He spoke of his youth, of arrogance that once blinded him, of nights when wisdom felt like a burden too heavy to bear, of moments when he removed his crown and asked in the dark, "Can I still hear his voice, or have I grown deaf to the very God who gave me this throne?" She had expected brilliance. She had prepared for brilliance. But she had not expected this, vulnerability. Her mind, trained to dissect words, now fell silent before the quiet truth of a man who had nothing to prove. She had come to examine him, to measure him with her mind. But now, with each passing moment, she realized she was the one being seen. Not as a queen, not as a ruler, not as a figure of power, but as a human being with wounds long concealed beneath years of success and ceremony. Everything she had ever used to protect herself, her pride, her poise, her intellect, they began to fall away like layers of old silk. And beneath it, for the first time in a very long time, she felt unguarded. Solomon did not try to impress her with prophecy or dazzle her with miracles. He offered something far rarer, empathy. He answered her pain with his own. He didn't just know things, he had felt them, and maybe that, more than any wisdom, was what made him worthy. And then he looked at her, truly looked, and said with a voice both kind and firm, "No one has come from so far just to ask, and no one has asked like you, just to see." Time seemed to bend in that chamber. Attendants drifted into silence. The glow of oil lamps dimmed, but the two of them remained, no longer king and queen, but simply two seekers, two souls who had once believed that power meant fulfillment and now understood that the deepest hunger was not for gold or glory, but for truth, for connection, for something eternal. Have you ever met someone who didn't just answer your question, but made you feel for the first time that your question mattered? They stayed long after everyone else had gone. They were not exchanging declarations or promises. They were exchanging presence. And in that stillness, both of them discovered what perhaps neither had expected to find. They were not so different after all. That night, Jerusalem was hushed. No music played in the palace courts. No flutes whispered in the garden paths. No voices echoed through the marble halls. The torches that usually danced like fireflies along the balconies were unlit. Instead, only the stars flickered overhead, and the rooftop lay wide and still. On that rooftop, a woman sat alone. No crown, no audience, no armor of elegance. Just her and the breath of the night wind brushing through her hair like a memory returning. Since arriving in this holy city, she had not once allowed herself this kind of silence. By daylight, she had been composed, flawless, regal, untouchable. Every word measured, every glance deliberate. But now, with the world sleeping and no one left to impress, she encountered something far more unnerving than any question she had asked. A strange, sacred emptiness. Not despair, not sorrow. Something different, something sacred in its stillness. And it was in that stillness that she realized something utterly unexpected. She no longer needed the answers. She no longer needed to understand why her soul had always ached beneath the glitter of her throne. She no longer craved a theory to explain the midnight tears that visited her without warning. She had arrived with scrolls of questions folded into her soul. But what she had received was not explanation. It was something far more powerful, presence, the kind that does not teach by speaking, but by being. There had been a man, yes, a king of great insight. But it wasn't his wisdom that undid her. It was the unspoken truth behind his eyes. A truth that saw her before she ever spoke. A gentleness that never tried to fix her, but simply stayed. That presence was what undid the knots within her. And yet, behind that man, behind the humility in his voice, the trembling honesty in his stories, she sensed something else. A presence even greater. One he never dared to claim as his own. Solomon may have been wise, but his wisdom flowed from a river he did not create, a river whose source he reverently acknowledged but never touched. And as she sat alone beneath the stars, she could feel it, like the echo of something eternal. It was not philosophy, it was not law. It was a presence that had no name, but carried the weight of heaven. She had once bowed before idols, stone figures draped in gold, gods who never spoke and never saw. But now she trembled not in fear, but in awe, because for the first time she had been seen. No thunder cracked the sky, no angel descended from clouds. There were no miracles written into the stars that night. And yet, something deep inside her soul broke open, not in violence, but in welcome. Like a child who has wandered far, returning home to find that the door was never locked, and the lamp had been left on. Have you ever felt that kind of homecoming, not in a place, but in a presence? She looked up, and the sky no longer felt like myth. The stars no longer felt distant. They felt like eyes that had always been watching, waiting for this very moment. She did not weep. Her dignity remained intact. But if anyone had seen her, they might have noticed the light in her eyes had changed. Not the glow of power, not the fire of pride, but the shimmer of a soul that had heard something holy and wordless say, "I see you." She left the palace without ceremony. No heralds followed her steps, but by dawn the change had already traveled ahead of her. The streets of Jerusalem stirred with whispers. The same people who had stared at her arrival now turned to each other with quiet wonder. Something was different. The queen no longer moved like a conqueror. She moved like someone who had been claimed. The regal steel in her gaze had softened, not weakened, but transformed. The woman who had once radiated brilliance now radiated peace. Her voice grew gentler, her laughter more real, her silences more telling than speeches. When her officials, curious and hopeful, asked if she had found what she came for, she spoke only one sentence: "I have heard, and I have seen." She who once traveled the length of the earth in pursuit of answers now knew that she had never truly been seeking answers at all. She had been seeking a voice that would not just answer, but understand. And what she found, what she could never quite name but would never forget, was not a solution to her doubts, but a presence who had already known every question in her heart before she ever spoke it aloud. A presence who did not need her to believe in him first, to love her, Before the first rays of sunlight spilled across the rooftops of Jerusalem, before the priests had kindled the morning fires, or the gates had fully awakened to the rhythm of a new day, her caravan was already alive with quiet motion. Servants moved with reverent silence, wrapping bolts of fine silk, sealing jars of rare perfume, and carefully crating the gold and jewels that had once gleamed like trophies of her wealth. These were the treasures she had brought with royal pride, gifts meant to honor a great king, but what she would carry home was something no one could see, something beyond price, beyond ceremony, beyond the record books of kings. The palace gates creaked open. Courtiers offered shallow bows and polite words. To them, it was just the closing chapter of a diplomatic visit. Another queen come to marvel, another monarch gone home with a few clever proverbs. They saw only the departure of status. They missed the transformation of a soul. Because what she left behind wasn't dust or silk, it wasn't a token of alliance or a scroll of tribute. Hidden among the departing camels and crates was something unmarked by scribes and unrecognized by the courts. A gift that did not glitter, yet carried the weight of heaven. It was not meant for the treasury, it was meant for the heart. A gift whispered, not spoken, given, not displayed. It was the kind of gift that changes the atmosphere of a room long after its giver is gone. And though no official account recorded it, something shifted in Solomon after she left. He who had once debated with brilliance and ruled with unwavering certainty began to speak less in riddles and more in yearning. He lingered longer in the temple, alone in prayer. His words, once carved with confident wisdom, grew softer, sometimes aching. Ecclesiastes emerged not as a king's decree, but as the confessions of a searching heart. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. And song of songs. Those were not the songs of politics. They were the melodies of a soul that had tasted something eternal and longed to hold it again. Some say she left him a cloth embroidered with southern words, a farewell that could only be read by moonlight. Others whisper that she sang a song no one else would ever hear, a melody Solomon played once, then sealed away behind temple walls. But what left the deepest imprint wasn't thread or sound. It was the silent knowing between two people who saw each other beneath the surface. She saw not a king, but a man whose wisdom couldn't protect him from the loneliness of his calling. And what she gave not only to Solomon. Ancient legends speak of her return to Sheba with more than riches. Some say she carried new life, a child born not merely of affection, but of something deeper, a connection, a spiritual inheritance. Was it a son, a daughter? The stories vary, but in the rich traditions of East Africa and Ethiopia, she is honored not just as a ruler, but as the matriarch of a royal line, one whose origin was rooted in awakening. Not conquest, not war, but a question asked and a soul answered. Could that have been her true gift? Not what she gave to Jerusalem, but what she brought back from it, a seed of revelation that would outlive both crown and memory. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. What she carried beyond the city walls could not be catalogued. It could not be replicated or stolen. It did what no caravan had done before. It touched a heart, shifted a destiny, and left behind a sacred echo. And perhaps for those of you watching this now, for those who have also traveled far, whether across lands or through the wilderness of the Spirit, this story speaks to something familiar. Have you ever searched for something you couldn't quite name, only to return with something no one else can see? Have you ever been changed not by answers, but by presence? Because the deepest truths are rarely written in books or sealed in vaults. They are remembered only by those who've been transformed by them. And the Queen of Sheba, once known only as a woman of gold and splendor, was, in the end, remembered for something far more powerful. She became the woman who searched, the woman who listened, the woman who gave without boasting and received without pride, the one who conquered Solomon, not with force but with understanding, and left behind not a monument but a mark on eternity. She returned as quietly as she had come. No trumpets announced her arrival. No scrolls were read aloud in the city gates. There was no parade winding through the palace streets. Only the desert wind whispered around her, tugging gently at her robes as if urging her not to speak, because what she carried now was too sacred for spectacle. Her gaze, once piercing with command, now held a softness that could not be named. It was as though her eyes no longer fully belonged to the world she ruled, as though part of her remained elsewhere, somewhere far beyond the sands of Sheba. To the outside world, nothing seemed to have changed. The marble columns of her palace still glowed white in the noonday sun. The scent of frankincense still wafted through the air. Officials still bowed in practiced rhythm. But something had shifted, and those close to her felt it like a hush before a miracle. She was the same queen, but she was no longer the same woman. She spoke less than before. Her voice, once sharp and commanding in court debates, became reserved, gentle even. She no longer found pleasure in feasts overflowing with wine and music. Instead, she wandered the courtyards alone, tracing her fingers along the sun-warmed stone walls, like someone searching for a door no one else could see. Have you ever returned from a moment that changed you forever, only to find the world had stayed the same? No one ever heard her proclaim belief in a foreign god. She never built an altar, never hosted a public conversion. There was no declaration, no religious decree, and yet something in her life began to speak for her, louder than any proclamation could. Where once her decisions cut like blades, now they flowed like rivers of mercy. She spared the life of a man once sentenced for treason, not because he deserved it, but because she had changed. She commissioned the first refuge for the elderly in her kingdom, a gesture no one had expected, but one that would echo through generations. And then, quietly, she began to write. Not royal laws or state records. These writings weren't intended for public eyes. They were fragments of thought, written in a flowing hand, perhaps for her child, perhaps for no one at all. Intimate reflections from a queen who once possessed everything, but had willingly given it all up to chase a single burning question: does anyone truly see me? Then one day the writing stopped. The parchment remained untouched. No one asked why, but those around her noticed something had lifted. The crease in her brow eased. Her silence no longer felt heavy. It felt whole, as though she had discovered something so deep, so complete, that it no longer needed to be spoken. It only needed to be lived. From that day forward, she no longer asked the old questions, because her very life had become the answer, and her kingdom too began to shift, not with revolutions or grand reforms, but in subtler ways. The marketplace grew more honest, the courts more merciful, the streets safer, more tender. Foreign traders noticed, and though they never understood the reason, they whispered over campfires and caravans, "Something is different in Sheba." When they asked why, the answer was always the same. The queen met someone in the north. No one knew his name. She never told the story, but everyone felt it. She had gone out seeking wisdom, and she had returned with something far greater. Not a doctrine, not a system, a presence, a truth, a faith that needed no definition to move hearts. Long after her death, her legacy lived in the quiet dignity of her people, and centuries later, her name still unspoken, Jesus would remember her. "The Queen of the South will rise at the judgment," he said, "for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and now something greater than Solomon is here." Matthew 12:42. He didn't need to say her name, he didn't need to spell out her story, because the journey itself was the testimony, the path of a woman who gave up everything, comfort, pride, certainty, to chase a whisper from God she wasn't even sure existed. And in that pursuit, she found not just answers, but the one who had been watching her all along. Can you feel it? That same question still pulses in the hearts of kings and servants alike. Do I get to be seen? Is there anyone who hears the questions I'm too afraid to say out loud? Who understands the silence? I can't explain. The Queen of Sheba dared to ask. She dared to leave behind the known for the possibility of something greater. She dared to walk across deserts with no map to certainty. And because she did, she discovered what many never will, that sometimes the greatest wisdom isn't found in answers, but in the gaze of a God who already knows every question and loves us still. Not everyone will walk the roads to Jerusalem. Not everyone will cross deserts or stand in a king's court. But the journey of the Queen of Sheba was never really about geography. It was about longing, about the quiet ache that lives in every human heart, the ache to be known, to be understood, to be seen. And maybe that's your journey too, because not every question in your soul needs to be answered with words. Some of the most sacred answers come not through arguments or explanations, but through presence, through someone who doesn't fix you, but sees you. And somehow, that's enough. Many people go their entire lives surrounded by others, yet never truly seen, never truly known. But if you've ever been like her, if you've ever felt that ache in the night, if you've ever dared to face your emptiness instead of hiding from it, if you've ever walked away from comfort just to search for something more, then maybe, just maybe, this story isn't ancient history. Maybe this story is about you. Maybe you're more like her than you ever realized. And if God could see her, a woman with no name in the text, a queen whose questions went beyond her crown, then isn't it possible that he sees you too? That he's seen every step of your search, every quiet prayer you didn't know how to speak, every night you laid awake wondering if you mattered at all. And maybe he brought you here to this story to whisper through the centuries, I see you. I always have. If something in this story stirred something inside you, leave us a comment below. We would love to hear from you. What are you searching for? What questions live quietly in your heart? And if this video spoke to your spirit, if it reminded you that you're not walking alone, don't forget to subscribe to The Bible Storyteller. Every story we share is a gentle reminder. You are not forgotten, you are not overlooked, you are not alone on your journey. You are seen, you are loved, you are part of the story God is still telling.